Welcome to Envision Radio from the United Way of Greater Charlottesville, City of Promise, and News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM WINA, and brought to you by the Jefferson School Foundation with Mark and Price, coming to you from downtown Charlottesville. Today we are thrilled to be joined by Leon Henry, Bronx native and the Director of Social Services for the City of Charlottesville, bringing more than a decade of experience in social work and child welfare. But most excitingly for me, our next guest on this episode of Envision Radio.
What's happening?
Not much. There
has to be much. There has to be a lot of things going on.
Oh yeah, I mean, work-wise, social services is just a very busy space right now.
Yeah.
In every area, there's a lot of new things happening. There's a lot of state mandates, federal mandates. So we're making adjustments, keeping busy. So. When I say not much, I'm just more so like, what can you say? It's the norm.
It's so much.
It's psychological tool. Because if I get started, I won't stop.
It's the norm.
So people go, how you doing? You just go, fine. I'm fine.
I'm trying to stop that.
Why?
Because I feel like I'm lying. I'm always like, fine. I don't know if I'm fine. Sometimes I've been like, I'm making it.
Yeah, but do you ever ask that question with...
Please don't say nothing but fine.
In order to get a real answer?
No, please say fine to me. Yeah, please, if I ask you how you're doing, please say fine.
I'm going to give you something else, though.
But if you ask me how I'm doing, barely making it.
I don't know. It's just like, for me, it's like, I feel like you speak it into existence.
Okay.
In a sense,
so great.
So it's almost like, like, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, the day go in. Exactly. And just kind of approach every situation with, like, gratitude in a sense. So, I see how, it could be so much worse. So, every time, I just feel blessed for the opportunities.
Yeah, if you got a big imagination, it could always be worse.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't even have to imagine too far.
I'm saying my imagination is so big.
That's right. Well, look, big thanks to our sponsor, our friends, Jefferson School Foundation, jeffersonschoolfoundation.org. Let's talk a little bit. So we get to the work. On the show, we get to the work eventually, but we start. Tell us a little bit about growing up, and then we want to trace the path of where you're from, how you got here, and then we'll sort of take it as it goes from there.
Okay, so where I'm from, so I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. I was born in Jersey though, but when I was young, we did a little transition for a little while to Florida.
That's a big transition.
Yeah, it was a big transition. I was only maybe like a month old.
Okay.
So we lived in Florida for a few years, moved around a lot, and then eventually transitioned to the Bronx, where I grew up with my grandparents and my parents, and kind of found stability, and that's where I kind of really matured and really established myself. Just growing up, in the Bronx. So for those who are familiar with the Bronx, the area of the Bronx I grew up in is called like Uptown. So that's like around Gun Hill Road, Boston Road area, Co-op City. So people from the Bronx know those areas.
We don't know what none of that means.
Yeah,
the Bronx, one of the boroughs, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. So
do you know the boroughs?
The Bronx. Yeah. New York? Is New York one of the boroughs?
New York. Well, New York City.
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
I don't know none of the boroughs. I couldn't name one borough but the Bronx.
Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn,
Queens.
Staten Island, Long Island, all those areas.
How many boroughs are there?
5 boroughs, right?
Oh, okay.
All I know is the Bronx. Growing up, you don't really leave your borough too much. I mean, I spent some time like in Harlem as a youth,
cool.
like 125th Street, like by like the Apollo, and just hanging out.
Oh, that's cool.
And just stuff like that. But for the most part, you just kind of grew up in your neighborhood. You kind of stay in your neighborhood in a sense. But so yeah, grew up in the Bronx. I'm the first generation born in America. Both of my parents are from Jamaica. So that's a big part of my upbringing, just kind of growing up in a Caribbean household. So I grew up on, the ackee and sawfish and the curry goat and the rundown and all those things, so that's a big part of me, the Caribbean culture. Went to public schools, for middle school I went to Olinville, 213th, Truman High School. So those are really big, important pieces of my life. My father, he was a barber. And my mom, she obviously stayed home with us. I had 3 brothers, so we couldn't afford like childcare and things like that. So
What number are you?
I'm the second.
Okay.
The second.
That is so important. Your birth number.
You're
I'm the top. I'm the top. I'm the oldest.
Yeah.
Second child.
It matters a lot because being the second child, I had the opportunity to learn from my brother's mistakes.
I was making the mistakes.
Yeah, well, and your parents' mistakes. I mean, there's that really interesting study, which we've talked about before, is like no two kids have the same parents.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
even in the same family, I
Absolutely.
think about my kids. My kids are almost exactly 3 years apart, right? We were 3 years older, 3 years wiser, 3 years tireder, right? I mean, like, a lot changes in that time, right? And if you're a second, there's already another one. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the dynamics are very different,
It's
right?
different.
And so I think it's funny when we as parents reflect and go like, what happened to y'all? We raised you the same. But when you break it down, like you just didn't.
No, you
couldn't.
didn't. I tell my mama all the time, you was not raising the mother two like me.
No, you can't.
was not.
You can't, right?
It's so true, and it's every kid is so unique.
Yeah.
If you look at my older brother, he was just like me, and him was like yin and yang.
Yeah.
Sure.
But we came up in the same household.
Yeah.
And then also my two younger brothers, completely different too. They got their own personality. And it's interesting, but it's so true. Just growing up, in the city, my neighborhood, it was good. Like, I felt like my neighborhood was really close knit. I had a lot of friends in the neighborhood. The older dudes, they always looked out for the younger guys. And the young guys stuck together. I've always felt safe growing up. And if I ever had any issues or anything like that, I always had my boys and my friends would always like have my back. And also my father was involved in my life, and my older brother. They were always, always like had my back. So I've always felt supported and loved in my household. Right. So that's a little bit about the school system. Growing up, one of the really important things that happened for me in life was I got connected into sports. My father being a barber, he used to cut hair, and he used to cut hair of this kid that used to go to Truman, and he used to be on a wrestling team. And after my older brother, dropped out of school as like a freshman in high school, he just wanted to be really intentional about trying to like connect me in a way in school so that I can hopefully have success. Because we know how it is in the public school system in the city. You can get kind of looked over. You don't really have a lot of support. But the sport of wrestling really just opened doors for me. I started my freshman year, and I got really good at it. When I mean good, I put a lot of work into it. But I was already an athlete just from like hanging out in the neighborhoods, in the parks often, playing ball and just being outside a lot, and just but in wrestling, it was one-on-one. It was an opportunity for me to work hard and kind of see results on the mat when I competed. So fortunately, I had the opportunity to like win the New York City Championships.
Wow, you were very in the league.
Yeah.
You was like, I was pretty good.
Wow.
I was like state's good. You was like, yep, the
Yeah.
borough good.
Yeah.
I was tearing people head up.
Yeah, I placed in the New York State Championships 3 years in a row. So I put out a record for my school. It's crazy because my senior year, I won the Iron Horse Award, which like one athlete gets it out of all the sports.
Like
in New York
it's all
City.
like it's collective. It's not
Like
just for wrestling.
It's just like the best athlete of my senior class. So so that really changed a lot for me, because a lot of times in my neighborhood where things would happen and people would get in situations and things like that, I was oftentimes at practice, or I was at traveling overseas. I got to wrestle in Moscow. I got to.
This is when you were in high school?
In high school, I got to wrestle in Paris. I went to France. I went to Bulgaria. So so I was really
Internationally
involved in that.
wrestling.
So that was a big part of my life, because being also the first in my family to ever go to school for like a bachelor's degree or master's degree, I had the opportunity to get sought out by colleges to be able to come in. So it was really helpful to have like that outlet, because like I said, a lot of kids that I grew up with didn't have wasn't afforded those opportunities, or didn't have that mentorship in their life to have just a different situation than I have currently. So I feel blessed. But I would say, my upbringing, that was my upbringing. Really, just connected family, grandparents that prayed for me, and a mom that was a social worker in her own right, because she, even though she didn't have much, she would always give her last for anyone.
Community social workers, for sure.
For sure. And a dad that he was present. I knew who he was, and I could always have a conversation with him, and that was a really important piece of the puzzle as well. So,
What college did you go to for wrestling?
So I ended up going upstate to a SUNY college, upstate New York, not too far from Syracuse, called Oswego State University. So I went there and competed for a few years. At that point in time, I was the first athlete in my school or my coaches that coach that was really D1.
The transition to college athletics.
But it was a lot of things that I didn't know about.
That's what they say. They said it's different.
When it comes to certain SAT stuff and grades, and there's certain things that you just when you don't.
Yeah, when you don't know, you don't know.
You just don't know. So I had a great time though in school and college, Oswego. My first 2 years, I went undecided. I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Don't we all?
So I didn't pick a major. For some reason, I thought I was going to be a physical education teacher and I was going to be a wrestling coach because my wrestling coach was my mentor. And then physical education, that was the only class in school I liked.
Right. A lot of athletes are physical education.
Sure.
My brother...
Listen, that kinesiology class William Mary was full.
He was like, we're athletes. How can athletes transition to
there
a
was
career outside of
one physical therapy. The first day used to trip me out. It was one unknowing girl who was going to be a physical therapist looking around. It was football player, basketball player, the entire soccer team, track team. And she was like, what? And we were like, oh, you thought, no. This is
sports business is one.
This is the one thing that fit our schedule that we all signed up for at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
And what sport was it you signed? Because I remember you told me you used to play soccer.
I was a soccer player. Yeah.
Top dog.
Yeah.
I remember you played overseas too, right?
A lifetime ago, a lifetime and a couple knees ago. Yeah.
You had 2 bionic knees.
Listen, there's enough screws in there to make me a TSA issue.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I remember meeting you a while back, and you mentioned that you played overseas soccer, and I know in order to do that you have to put a lot of work in to get to that level.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
So right there, I knew that that was a connection. I was like, all right,
yeah, it's the same kind of it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I was reading something the other day too about just and this as well, that your sports career ends whenever it ends, way before, you don't ever have to do anything else, right? And so I think it's interesting talking to younger people, right, who, I'm like, look, even if you want to pursue that at a high level, you should. Yeah. But remember how we talked about Kobe when he was 33? We were like, that dude's a dinosaur, right?
Yeah, people were talking about he was a dinosaur.
Washed, right? And even LeBron now is what, 40 years old?
He seems
41,
ancient.
Right? Ancient.
Yeah.
Ancient, right? Could not be basically dust, right? You know what I'm saying? So I think it's interesting when we think about the lifespan of things that, sports and I'd like your take. And we talked to, Thomas Brown about this too, and other people who have had sports careers of how much of that do you still sort of reflect on either knowingly or unknowingly, right? In the way you just carry yourself and go about your business or tackle problems or just, I have to believe it still shapes a lot of, how you view yourself and your work and your approach to things.
Yeah, I say 100%, because, when you're an athlete and you have to push yourself to the limit in order to get better, you got to hold yourself accountable. You have to work with teammates and be a team player. You got to take accountability, so, that's a big part of just kind of how I shape. It's definitely a big part of who I am, part of my DNA. You don't give up. Not every day is a good day. Right. So it ingrains just being able to be resilient. And for my kids, I always make sure that they were engaged in some type of sport because literally, in my neighborhood where I grew up, you can look. Some people made it to the military. But if not the military, not many of us went to college. I can maybe 2 people from my neighborhood that I grew up with that went to college. One went to Virginia State. Both of them actually went to Virginia State. So
okay.
From
New York?
From New York, from the Bronx, yeah.
We do get a lot of New Yorkers. UVA got a lot of New Yorkers.
Yeah.
Not Virginia, not UVA, Virginia State.
I know what I'm saying. When I went to UVA, and I was like, we had a lot of New Yorkers.
Huh.
A lot of Bronx.
Really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. They love it down here in the South.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure.
A little warm weather.
Instead of warming up, they said, we want to see 4 seasons now.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of brought me down here is, trying to get more 4 seasons, because up north it gets cold. And
bones start. I know y'all athletes, y'all bones get to hurting.
Stay
that
cold.
winter.
Yeah.
At this age, you like, you try to get up, you bend down too far. You do a leg day, you like, 3 days. You like, what the heck? What did I just do to myself? Like, really?
Truly. Listen, if you're just jumping in, this is Envision Radio from the United Way of Greater Charlottesville and City of Promise News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM WINA. Price and Markey here with Leon Henry. Big shout out to our friend, our sponsor, the Jefferson School Foundation. That's reimagined, redefined, and refueled for the future. JeffersonSchoolFoundation.org. So how did you get down here? What eventually drew you south?
What drew me to Charlottesville? I was in Massachusetts. I had been in my employment for it was going on like 10 years, and then I got to a place where I was like, am I going to do this forever? Am I going to like maybe look for other opportunities? I'm young enough to still have a career.
Yeah.
I'm doing something different if I choose to. At 10 years, I got a pension. In Massachusetts, you got to do 10 years in order to get a pension. And so I started like thinking to myself, like, if I'm going to do something different, I don't want to do it in the same area just because where I was at, there just wasn't a lot of opportunities. There wasn't like a big college or a big medical center, or, it wasn't like a place that drew a lot of people to like for business. So it was almost like, I was doing well there because of the cost of living and being in a state job and making the same as what they was making in Boston, kind of, but in Western Massachusetts. So we were in a good situation. I had a little real estate company that mom and pop's thing that we started up, and but it was like, okay, let me challenge myself to expand. I said, if I'm gonna move, I don't want to stay up north because it's cold. Mm-hmm. I want to go somewhere where I get the 4 seasons, and I also want to try something different, right? So Charlottesville, I started asking around, and trying to figure out. I was looking at like Florida, like Savannah area. I was looking at like North
more
Carolina.
south.
Then I was looking at like Virginia Beach, and then my mom reached out to my aunt, who's a local here, and was like, Leon's looking at moving. You should reach out to him, and tell him about because she told I was thinking about moving to Virginia. I was thinking Virginia Beach, but then when my aunt heard that I was looking at Virginia Beach here and I was applying for jobs out there, she reached out and was like, come check out Charlottesville, and it was like interesting because it was like right after the big event and everything. So I was kind of
a lot of people moved here after
August
that.
11th. You mean August 11th?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Like more people than I thought have like been like, hey, it was right around 2017. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
they was. I'm sure they was like, how could it get any worse? It can only get better.
Yeah,
buy low, buy the dip.
Yeah,
they was like, we're gonna get in low.
Yeah, no,
it's about to boom.
Yeah, it's interesting because even then I didn't really fully understand like what the market was,
sure,
and how crazy it was. I was into real estate, and all that.
But it probably didn't clock from where you were from.
No,
you know what I'm saying? Because up there, it's a whole. Yeah, I mean, like
it's
that's
a different ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
a whole
it's
different situation.
And you're exactly right.
And it wasn't moving up there property values like Charlottesville, so it wasn't even a thought like property values would be moving that fast.
Sure.
Especially in a small area. But so I came down. I spent some time here. And it was just beautiful, like the mountains. I went up to like Carter Mountain and like looked over.
That's how they get people.
Yeah, that's what they did. They just gave me a little tour.
Gave you the recruiting visit. I hung
out for about a week, and then I started applying for jobs, and I got a few job offers. Pretty much I got offered, the positions that I applied for, and it also told me like, okay, well, even if I go down there and I'm doing something that I'm not happy with, that there's also other opportunities there, where I was at, I didn't feel like there were opportunities. So, when I applied for, when I looked at the positions, the one that really stood out for me was becoming like an inpatient psychotherapist, like a therapist, like a LCSW in an inpatient psychiatric unit at UVA. When I saw that, I was like, you know what? Ultimately, I have goals of being a clinician long term, maybe even private practice at that point in my mind, thinking that, even if it's not full time, and just said, you know what, it just felt like the right thing. So I turned down the job and I ended up not taking it. But then like 2 months later, I reflected on it, and I was like, you know what, we should have did it. So I called that manager back, who was such a major support of mine when I was at UVA, and it was crazy because she said, you know what, Leon, we were just talking about you. And for me, it was like, this is 2 months later, and I called this lady, and she's telling me that we were just talking about
This
you.
town's small. They pick up a name and they keep it in their mouth. That's what I'm talking about. Good.
Yes.
You need people who say your name in rooms you ain't in.
Yeah, so I said, you know what, for her to be really intentional about making sure that I felt comfortable with such a big transition.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I had been at my job for 13 years, so I was connected in the community, very invested. My wife's family's from there, so it was a big decision. But between having some family here as well as the job opportunity and just how scenic it was here, and it felt like the community there was like some liberal community,
Some
pockets where it was like there was just so much more resources available here than what I saw where I was from. You know what I mean? Or what I've saw in places that I've been, in the neighborhoods that I grew up in. So.
Yeah, I actually just saw Tom Tom's going on and this week, and I just now saw a study that was like 30,000 people commute to Charlottesville to work. And it was also like the
commute as in like
our daytime, like our residential population and our daytime population, meaning people commute here during the day to work their 9 to 5. It's like 28,000 people.
Lots of people.
Yeah, so
from you're talking from
anywhere,
just like
anywhere
including
outside,
like green.
Yeah,
right,
They didn't
right,
say
right.
that, but that was just the stat they were
Sure.
talking about
Yeah, I buy
yesterday,
that,
and how we have a lot of positions that for people who are in very skilled labor workforce. And then there was another stat about the amount of money in this ecosystem, how it's like it's more than a college town would usually have.
Charlottesville?
Yeah, like we're very wealthy, essentially, is what
No,
this stat.
you don't say.
I was like, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
People want to
totally.
come here. People commute. They love the scenery. People like to keep it the way it is
Sure.
when they buy in or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
So it makes a lot of
totally.
sense. We always talk to people who are like, we moved here and we love the mountain.
A lot of that, yeah.
But at the same time, like, when I got here, I realized really quickly that, it's not exactly like what it looks like on the outside. You know what I mean? So the social economics is just
Oh, absolutely.
really.
That's what they don't tell you.
Well, it they do. It depends who you are. You might not mind, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the part of it, right? And I think that is, the one of the interesting things about, and I think this is endemic to a lot of areas, but certainly Charlottesville, and certainly I think towns with elite universities, because there's, the biggest employer in Charlottesville is.
Charlottesville? I
Yeah.
mean, UVA.
The second biggest employer in Charlottesville is.
UVA Health?
Exactly. You see what
I
I'm
have
saying?
2 guesses.
So and so when you think about like the labor force that works in those places, right? You have the folks who are, the orthopedists and the surgeons, and then the people who make the place run. Those are dramatically different economic bands.
Absolutely.
But they're huge.
Yeah.
Right? And one's bigger than the other. You know what I'm saying? So I think that like the economics of the place, like it tracks with, largely how you would think about what the story of Charlottesville is. And I think some of that came out in some of the stuff that happened in 2017. And then obviously, forwards and backwards from there. But I think that, how did you, when you came down here, how long did it take for you to sort of feel that? Did you feel it instantly? Did you, as you started working, were you like, right? Because I'm guessing that nobody, I guess knowing your family, that was probably also relayed to you to some degree.
For sure.
Right. And I think you had a little bit of a different lens than most people, right? Most people come here, they go to Pippin Hill, they go to Carter's Mountain, they go to UVA football game and go, oh,
Exactly.
cool. Right. So I would assume you had a little more insight.
No, absolutely.
But did you feel like you had, like, was it the right amount of insight, or were you like, okay, like there's more to it. There's more layers to the proverbial onion. Or parfait if you're if you're a Shrek fan.
I think when you go to a new area, like there's history there, and it's really complex, and seeing things from the outside, and also when you have a small community where things are like kind of like really tight knit in a sense too. If you're not from there, it takes time to like really build connections and better understand like the dynamics of all the different things that you need to know. When I first came down, I stayed with my Uncle Al, and he stayed right down the block over by right by Burley School.
Yeah.
The housing area over there, Rosedale. So we was over there. I stayed there for about a week and was in the community. I spent time in West Haven.
Yeah.
You know, so you know that's where I moved. You know, that's just how I've always moved. That's how I grew up. You know, so I recognized it was there. But at UVA, it felt like there was just like almost like two different worlds in a sense.
Sure.
You know, so now transitioning into the city, I'm actually like also seeing like even how more of it is. Like at UVA, just because of the connections I have to the community, with family, or just in general, like trying to be involved in certain ways. Being a social worker, you know, that's my work in a sense, like helping address, you know, even at UVA, my responsibilities was around social determinants of health related type support for community, you know, ensuring that individuals got their healthcare needs met, you know, whatever barriers that, you know, trying to support them around those things. So I saw a lot, but not just even from Charlottesville, because UVA, the medical center, like you got people coming from all over. It's a level 1 trauma center.
Yeah.
You know, but
I read something the other day about that. I mean, like people coming from like West Virginia, and I mean like, but for like repeat stuff, like people are traveling.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you live, aren't a lot of like rural hospitals shutting down? I mean, you gotta.
Oh yeah, but I think we take that for granted, right? That like, oh, we can just pop down to UVA.
Yeah, we do.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a resource.
We got 2 hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah, truly though, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday, and I don't even think I really clocked it to the degree that it should have been. Of like, if you live in 4 hours away in rural West Virginia, like you come to UVA.
You come to UVA,
right? Or you come to the Emily Kirk Center. Like that's like that.
Yeah.
That's a much different thing.
Yeah.
it's people's go to. I remember when I was growing up, there was a hospital in Culpeper when I was from Orange County, and they would be like, please take me to you. People, it's like a split between where the ambulance will take you. They'll take you to UVA or they'll take you to Culpeper. And my grandma used to say, "Don't take me to Culpeper. Take me to UVA. Culpeper will kill you." That's what.
Really?
Yeah. I don't care if it's an hour. She used to be like, "I don't care if Culpeper 10 minutes down the street. Culpeper. I don't know them." I
was about to say, shit, we're not getting a sponsorship from Culpeper's health system.
That's what my grandma
soon.
used to say. She was like, "Take me there. The hour it took to UVA.
Huh?
They'll
Yeah.
save my life." That's how she used to be.
Sure.
So
That's a huge resource.
yeah.
Huge resource. Yeah, and in transitioning from a community that had like a small little hospital, maybe like 200 beds compared to 750 beds or somewhere around there, it was just a big difference. So, but yeah, I noticed that, and it's such a big organization where you can have kind of 2 worlds, and people can exist that way and live here.
Yeah, it's got its own solar system.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So, but I will say, you know, my transition, you know, I'm really happy with it. You know, I feel like I'm where I want to be. You know, being with the city, being able to work in the community in the way I'm being able to work. So I'm excited about, you know, the future in this position, and so I think it was a good choice for me to transition. You know, I had been there for 7 years, so pretty much about 7 years. So it was a big decision. As you see, like usually I'm in positions and, you know, I do different things, and, you know, I don't like to jump jobs and things like that, but it just felt like it was an opportunity that I had to throw my hat in for. So I'm grateful, you know, to have been afforded this opportunity. So for sure.
If you are just jumping in, this is Envision Radio from United Way of Greater Charlottesville and City of Promise. News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM WNA. Price Markey here with Leon Henry on, I guess we're recording this Thursday. You're hearing it Saturday. So there's some Tom stuff happening. Get involved in that. But again, big thanks to our sponsor, our friends, Jefferson School Foundation. Join us in Shaping Tomorrow, honoring our rich history, creating opportunities for us to provide space for growth, collaboration, and lasting impact. That is jeffersonschoolfoundation.org. We didn't ask, how did you get into this field in the first place, right? So you've got obviously, you know, your upbringing, you've got a lot of, you know, culture, heritage, the sports thing. How does that land you into, you know, sort of, you know, social work and people-based work and right? I mean, you know, did you start there? Were you flirting with other stuff, right? You know, I mean, how'd you end up where you are?
Very, very good question. Like, so really, I just kind of fell into it because it's just who I am. You know, like growing up, you know, I always just been that person who try to be helpful. My mom was the same. Like I said, we were the family that even though we might have had a 1-bedroom apartment, we still had this person and that person living there, or this person that came from, you know what I mean? So
Okay.
she just had such a big heart. So like in my roots, it was just a normal thing to do. When I went to college, like I said, I didn't have like an idea of what I wanted to major in. So I deferred for 2 years. But then when I saw the degree wellness management, in my mind, in the classes, and what I saw was like it was helping people to live healthier lifestyles, make better decisions, manage stress, mental health, wellness, whether it be nutrition, whether it be mental, whether it be physical, and it was like, and being an athlete and stuff like that, it just fit for me. I was like, that's what I could see myself doing that. But the reality is that when I looked around after college, after doing it, I didn't really see any positions out there that said, we're hiring for a wellness manager.
That's right. That's right.
Wellness manager. But, I didn't do it based off of like what I thought was going to be the outcome like next. I did it because it just felt like that was what it was that my heart desired. It felt like it was something that, I could see myself doing, helping people in that way. I also minored in health science and athletic coaching. But then after college, I just continued to like do community work. I started, by working in a Boys and Girls Club as a program coordinator. And, so I was working with kids that had similar backgrounds that I did, but I was helping them like do like sports programs or do like homework after school activities. And it was just like, I felt like this is who I am. Like I wish I had, as a kid growing up, someone that could help me, with some good feedback and some, guidance and some counseling that kind of like look like me, like dress like me, that got a vibe about them, that understand kind of like what I'm dealing with, you know what I mean? So then from there, I went into working in a residential program with kids with behavioral issues that, they would have normally went to lockup, but instead of going to lockup, they allowed them to go to these programs and get their school and live there and all that without, actually, having to get incarcerated. And I was working in there and I was like, this is me. Some of these kids look like kids that were kids that I hung out with, that I grew up with, and they just really connected with me. And I did certain things for the program that really just kind of like made me feel like it was meaningful work, and then from there, I used to wonder, like, who are these people that are coming to these programs? And then every time they come, everybody, making sure they acting right. And I'm like, what's that about? And then, it was a CPS worker. So I was like, that's interesting. Maybe I could try to help these kids before they get to these programs. So maybe that could be the route that I go, because when those people come around, they're asking about, like, what are we doing to help these kids to be able to get back home in a safe way. So one day I just walked into the local DSS office with a suit and tie on, and I just said, I'm wondering if someone is here that can tell me a little bit about the job and like what,
that's an old school way to get a job.
That is some real.
That's how my grand all you need to do is go in with a suit and tie and tell them you're there for a job.
Cut out a print ad, called them on a payphone, and showed up with a briefcase. Like, Lord have
I
mercy.
just tell my grandma, that is not how it works. You gotta fill out after. They gotta call you down there. She'll be like, no, you just take the newspaper in there. And
listen, I will say,
and
and look, and we are of the same generation, and I think, and it's funny. I think that what I find so interesting about working with even youth and even people, you're like 8 years younger than me. I think what's always interesting is like there's parts of the old game that never die.
Yeah.
They just never, right? And that's why the thing that was like, oh, they didn't respond to my email. I'm like, call him.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, and I'm like, no, like pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And
y'all want to do stuff so manual. Why can't we do our
but that's how we were. But that's the thing, is that there was no other way to do it.
Yeah.
Right. There was no.
So you just walked in and said, "Can I hear some more about it?"
You know what I mean? So yeah, I walked in. I went to the front desk and I asked. I said, is there someone that I can talk to help me better understand, like, what is it that I would need to have in order to be qualified to do this work? So there was a supervisor there that the front desk called out to come and sit in the lobby and speak with me. And what she did, we sat, she talked to me and she encouraged me. She said, you know what, this is, bring your application, go online, submit it, get your resume together. And, she encouraged me to do it. So I did it. Next thing you know, I got a call, got interviewed, and I applied for the job and I got a job, being a child protective worker. And And honestly, you know, in Child Protective Services, I got to do a lot of different departments. There's a lot that happens in Child Protective, different things that you can do. But eventually, after having worked there for about 5 years, I look back and say, well, you know, in order for me to get promoted, in order for me to, you know, be clinical, in order for me to do whatever it may be, I'm going to have to get a master's degree. I recognized that quick, or I wasn't going to be able to easily go somewhere different with the wellness management degree and say like, yeah, I'm a wellness manager. And I just reflect and said like, what is it that, you know, I want to do? Or what is it that I've been doing? And then, you know, when I was looking at what should I go to school for, the degree social work came up and I started reading about it. And I was like, that's what I've been doing my whole life.
He was already doing it.
Mm.
So I went to school part-time and then I continued to work. So after about 3 years, I was able to graduate with my social work degree. So so that's what got me into social work. And I just kept pushing from there. Became licensed as a licensed clinical social worker. Now I can supervise individuals for their licensure. I did some private work, you know, and I just kind of flowed that way, you know, like, so it wasn't like I had exposure to, you know, in my neighborhood, we didn't really know anybody with degrees, you know what I mean? My parents, like I said, my dad was a barber, you know, and he was an amazing man, you know what I mean? And like I said, I talk about him like he's really important in my road and having success. But, you know, oftentimes I say, you know, what separates people oftentimes is the lack of access to certain things.
Absolutely.
You know, I happen to lead with heart and eventually listen to myself in a way and be able to have the maturity to self-reflect, to say like, okay, well, this was who I am, you know, but, you know, what I've seen now in a new environment, in new circles that I have access to, I see that oftentimes, you know, youth get different types of guidance that kind of help create and shape them when it comes to their professional decisions around their professions. But hey, you know, everything happens the way it's supposed to. But I think it's good. And with my kid, you know, one of the things that I feel like is going to be really important is to expose him to as many people doing different really cool things that you can get maybe some hands-on understanding experience of what it looks like to be in their shoes. And I think that's something that I can see myself as a father maybe kind of learning from, kind of like my own experiences, you know, what could be helpful.
You talk a little bit about, you were at the Boys and Girls Club, you were involved in your community in the Bronx, and we were working there. Have you found opportunities to do that here, or have interest in doing things like that? Tell me a little bit about things you work on, maybe outside of work, in that capacity, if you have any.
Yeah, so in the community, I would say when it came during the time I was at UVA, a lot of my work was around supporting team members to be involved in things that they were passionate about in the community, as well as provide them support around the work that they do within their roles and their job expectations. At UVA, it was really difficult because I had a whole lot of direct reports for a long time. And I found myself oftentimes like putting out fires consistently, and that was kind of like a big responsibility for me, but also doing, you know, leadership stuff like the budget or whatever it may be. So, you know, I would try to like go to different events and participate or like be a part of things, but not as much as I would have wanted to. But for the most part, yeah, just in general, be a part of different committees like mental health stuff or fatherhood things around fatherhood engagement. I was also a counselor, like I said. I did some pro bono stuff as well as leading like groups or, you know, just general, like, you know, I'm not saying it was programming, you know, I didn't start any new programs or that, you know, just more so being a support and being engaged in that way was kind of my role. And now here with this city, you know, I think it's the same. Like I try to participate in the events that I see that happen. Like if it's going to be at the Tom there's someone talking, I want to be a part of it. If there's an event like West Haven Day, I want to be there. I was in the dunk tank with Chief Patrick and Mayor Wade. I got dunked a bunch of times. Yeah, so I volunteered to do that. Or there was an event at Tonsler. I'll be there. My benefits teams will be. So I try to really be involved in community activities. It's really important to me. It's a priority. I think different seasons also impact, what my ability is and bandwidth to do maybe more. I'm in a season of my life where I also have young kids, right? My son, plays travel baseball and rec baseball, and my daughter plays softball and she plays travel softball, and they're young and they have tournaments every weekend and they have games during the week and they go to practice and I'm hitting the balls and I'm
I remember that.
And, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Sometimes I find myself doing the dad thing, because I know at some point in time, they're going to be big and they're going to be doing their own thing. I also got older kids. My oldest is 24. She's in New York. I also have a junior who's in JMU. She's getting ready to go into her seat. So I see as they get bigger, they transition out and they live their life. So right now, just the season that I am in. But with talking about community events, there's one plug I do want to put in. On the week of June 13th, it's the Virginia Department of Social Services has identified that as Fatherhood Engagement Week.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So, and what happens is different localities across the state can. The hope is that they're being very intentional about doing some type of activity or that really promotes and acknowledges fatherhood engagement and the importance of that. And oftentimes social services agencies don't always get the narrative out. There's not always that they're father friendly, right? And it's really, fatherhood is really important to me. It's something that I want to ensure that we're really being intentional about supporting. So I'm looking at having an event, more so event like having activities.
Something to do like the child and the father can do together. Okay.
Yeah, and the plan is to have it on June 17th. It'll be
right next to Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. From you're right. From 3 to 6, and we're gonna have free food, burgers, hot dogs. Hopefully, we'll have something like a bouncy house, and also some vendors out there that are that are able to that work with fathers, and that's gonna be at Tonsler Park. So when I get more details and things like that, I'll share.
Yeah.
But that's something that we're also doing as an organization. We also recently did a partnership with UVA Health, the mobile primary care unit. I don't know if you guys have noticed.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's been on the downtown mall.
Yeah.
Every
that's
other
cool.
week on Thursdays. That was also another initiative that we started this past year. Just really ensuring that community members have access to meeting their healthcare needs, especially with all the changes that are happening with Medicaid around renewals and people potentially losing coverage. Just trying to be proactive. We also have another. So we're doing things in the community, but it's just so much work to be done, and I know that there's so many other people in the community that are doing so much that I try to just support and participate as much as I can. But I do know that there's a lot of people doing a lot of work, so I give them lots of credit for everything they do. So.
If you're just hopping in, this is Envision Radio from the United Way of Greater Charlottesville, City of Promise, News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM WINA. Price and Markey here with Leon Henry. Talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned it or you alluded to it. How do you parse your time and your energy in the context of you're a father, right? And your work, you're trying to do two things that are labor intensive, right? You're trying to be the dad you want to be. You're trying to give the right amount of time, talent, treasure to the people who you also, I would argue, feel responsible for in your job. Sure. How do you draw that line, and where do you draw that line if you understand that it's very likely your children are in a situation where they are likely privy to more opportunities than some of the families who you're working with.
Absolutely.
But they're also that's your job, is right. And so you see what I'm getting at, of like, how do you decide just when and where to be like, my kids are fine, I can look over here, or my greatest responsibility is to make sure that these kids continue to be fine. I have to, does that bother? It bothers me, right? It bothers me. It bothers me. My kids are 6 and 3, so I think about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I want commiserate with me, or maybe not, or maybe just tell me how to deal with it, right? I think about that a lot, right? I think about that all the time. I have a responsibility to 2 little curly head knuckleheads, but they've got everything they need. I also have a responsibility to 120 others who don't have the same opportunity, right? So how do I parse through that? How do you parse through that? Or are you just like, I don't even think about it because I've got it figured out?
That's the issue. So, and what I'm understanding is, like, when you see the situation that you've been able to create for your family, for your kids, and you see that there are a lot of people that are less, don't have the same opportunities. Like, how do you sit with that? And like, how do you like navigate that?
And just with your own time and your own space and your own energy, right? I think that one of the hardest things, certainly the job that you're in and that you have done, is like, how long can you do it for? How long can you do it well for? How long can you do it with the same energy, with the same, sort of optimism, right? Because there is an element of it, of the deeper you get, you're like, yo, come on, right? And so, thinking about that, of like, there's a preservation element to it, that your ability to do your job well for the folks who rely on you is, it's the whole sort of put your mask on before the right. And so there's some of that of like, how do you look after yourself and your own unit, with the understanding that an argument could be made that a 75% version of you isn't doing anybody any good, right? Your battery's running out. You can't give what you need out there. But then the counter is like, well, he took a vacation. How dare he? Right? Because your mandate is for people who have less opportunity, or have been unlucky, or are structurally being sort of battered. How do you sit with that?
Yeah. So how do I manage it? I would say, I'm fortunate with the way I'm trusted with the work that I do, to be able to manage it and manage it well at a high level. The reality is, like, and I'm not saying that this is for everyone, but I think once you get to a certain level, like a director's level of an organization, it kind of becomes a part of who you are, and a part of like how you move, in a sense. I have the ability to be flexible with my time, in which I can, potentially be present at a baseball game for my son, or a softball game for my son. But that might mean that I might get home a little bit later that night, and I might work another 4 or 5 hours overnight to make sure that if there's a deadline that needs to be made, that it's made, right? And then also at the same time, you can't do it all, and you have to be able to accept that, right? Like, what drives you? Like, what is your purpose? You know what I mean? Like, what season of life are you in? And like, what can you commit? And is it enough? And if it's not enough, like, how do you figure out ways to bridge that gap? Right? Like, does that mean you need to delegate more? Does that mean you need to mentor and pull up other individuals that could maybe take an opportunity of leadership to help develop them, professionally? So I always look at the cup as like half full. So no matter what the situation is what it is, and then trying to figure out, like, okay, like, how can you make it best case scenario, so that everyone involved can benefit as much as possible, right? I think I try to, like, just be open to that, and be flexible and open-minded to like what that can look like. Having good relationships with the people that you work with, as well as your family, and being able to have those conversations, like when you're doing too much, or you're not doing enough, and being able to make changes and accept feedback, right? I always say, like, feedback is one of the hardest things to give, and it's also one of the hardest things to receive.
Yes.
So
evaluation season.
Yeah.
Are we in that right now?
Yeah.
Is that what's happening?
So I try to be, I try to be really appreciative of people who are willing to give me that time to be able to do that for me, and I take it serious, and I try to make adjustments. So balance is everything, right? Nothing's ever going to be perfect.
Sure. That's right.
So if you don't manage your expectations, then you're gonna run into situations where you're constantly like just being disappointed.
In your transition to the city and your current work, is it has your point of view changed on, coming from UVA, right, and which is sort of an ecosystem unto itself, and then into the city? Has your point of view on the work that you're doing changed? Is your point of view on sort of some things that you had implemented or were implementing? I mean, do you have is the perspective broader and different, or is it largely aligned with sort of the past, your last 7-8 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's aligned, with the role that I have, like social services, social worker background, because the approach that a social worker, or the lens that we use to view things in the world and how we respond and create solutions and collaborate, I think it's pretty consistent across the board. I think the environment is different, and and how things are done, and what people prioritize. I think there's differences in that, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration, and I really try to focus on those opportunities, and I don't feel like conflicted or in any kind of way of any of my previous work or current work moving forward. I think it's interesting because when I was at UVA, a lot of the things around like child protective reports or things around ensuring that people were safe in their community when they discharged, and just staying in charge. I won't say in charge because UVA is a big monster, so there's a lot of people that are making a lot of decisions. But just being a part of that, or being a resource that people would tap into in order to help with those types of related things. Helping people make sure that they have like a funding source like Medicaid, or if they have a UAI and they're transitioning and got the right level of services, is it adult protective type? So a lot of, even though it's not the same as previously when I was at Massachusetts doing child protective work specifically. This work was a little bit of a mixture of like some benefits, some services, some administrative stuff. So it felt pretty seamless. The transition, and it was really helpful. I couldn't have thought of a different opportunity outside of actually doing benefit work to help me better understand kind of like what that work could potentially look like. But now it's like actually getting into the weeds and like, being in those rooms where conversations are being had about, expectations and changes. It's like drinking from a fire hose, but I've been 100% in, and it's been a year, so I still feel like that's short time to move into from an outside agency into a leadership role, and in a time where there's been a lot of changes. Like our teams have had to navigate a government shutdown, SNAP benefits being frozen, changes in how expectations around error rates, and like there's just so much going on that I know that I'm not an expert, and I probably will never be, but I'm just committed to learning more and more, and leaning on my supports when needed, to have success in this role. For sure.
I want to ask a cynical question to both of you, and then
he loves cynical questions.
Oh, yeah.
Well, here
he's the what do you call it? Resident.
Is it and I got this from when you were speaking, right? There's a lot going on, and state mandates, federal mandates, and error rates, and is it too hard to help people?
Is it too hard to help people?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Help me better understand.
Well, I don't understand even a tenth of your work, but I do understand it's very rigorously, and I would argue sometimes onerously boundaried. And I understand you could argue, a cogent argument would be, well, rigor is good when we're dealing with large sums of money in people's lives, and like it's important that you have structure to that. I think a cogent counter argument one could make is like, yes, but in some cases these are people who just need quick support that doesn't come with a bunch of reporting responsibility and doesn't come with really sort of archaic demands on the actual provider to just give the people what they need. The person closest to the problem should be able to dictate and designate how the solution gets made, not someone in an office miles away reading an Excel spreadsheet, right? And so how do those things, are they oil and water? Is there a way for them to mix, right? Because again, if we know that we have a town that's very small, very well educated and very rich, how is it so hard to make movement? We've been parroting the same poverty statistics for literally my entire life, right? And I don't think it's because we don't have people who are smart enough to do it, or who have the will to do it, or who have the interest and the creativity to do it, right? So could you not argue that some of it is endemic to the fact that, like, I would argue some of your work is not done and is not allowed to be done in service of actually helping people. It's because you're required to get the money and report on the money, and whoops, that went there, and I got to structure it like this, and da-da-da, instead of being like, I know where the 10 people are and I know what they need. I can't actually give it to them.
So the answer to your question, yes.
The answer is yes.
It is absolutely yes, in different ways, right? Internally, just, the struggles that, our team members will see is that our programs are very heavily monitored and very heavily, they say, scrutinized, and there's a lot of different mandates and policy and things that you have to meet in order to check certain boxes in order to say that, okay, well, you did a good job, or you met the expectation. And sometimes, checking the box doesn't necessarily mean that you did everything that you could potentially have done to create the best situation that you could have created to support that family in the best way that you could, right? So it's almost like trying to figure out how to, like what they say, like how do you meet the need, how do you work how do you work within a system while like changing the system at the same time?
Right.
Because if you don't work within the system, then you
can't work at all.
Yeah.
Well, you lose all the resources that. That's exactly. Well, all right. Say more about that, because I think that's an interesting view, and I think there's nuance to that people sometimes lose, right? Because you'll get the feedback like, well, why don't you just burn it down or do it your way or whatever? You know what I'm saying? And I think what you said is really poignant, and I think it's worth exploring slightly. That, like, look, you said two things that I think connect to that, which is like, it's not going to be perfect, right? So we're not going to get to ideal state where it's like, I'm just off on my own, like doing the thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I think it's interesting, and it's important to hear, from someone who's certainly committed to this and doing a great job at it and is really deep in it, that like, there is compromise, and sometimes internal sort of moral compromise that you have to be able to live in to make any progress.
Absolutely.
Right? Because the other option is none.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think when you say compromise too, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have a discussion, or you can't push back, or you can't explore an alternative narrative, or you can't pull back some more layers, but sometimes the reality is that you have to sit with being able to do as much as you were able to do, and having given your best effort, you know what I mean? And that's okay as we try to make improvements so that in the future, there can be, even a better outcome. You know what I mean? And that's hard, because a lot of our team members, they lead with their heart also.
Yeah,
totally.
A lot of people don't get into social services work because of the money. Like,
they're trying to be millionaires. They're trying to help people.
No, they're really trying to help people. They have big hearts, and oftentimes when people reach out for support, for social services support, oftentimes they're not in the best situation. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's not a calm interaction, right? Yeah.
So they're not people aren't always the best version of themselves, right? Especially just due to the fact that the reality is that social services programs, people have to be vulnerable enough to ask for help.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
And the reality is, I don't assume that anybody reaches out for help because, happily, like, because that's what they want. That's what they would like. That's how they would rather things be, right? just having grace for our team members and what they manage on a daily basis is really important. Having staff engagement and making sure that they have the training and the support that they need to be successful in the tools is a big part of kind of like what our priorities are right now. And we have support from the state and the federal government around like AI, like technology. So there's a lot of changes there and stuff like that. But our team members, they do a good job trying to meet clients where they're at, and customer service is really important. I think everyone should be treated fairly, equally, reasonably, and it doesn't matter like what your title is. People are people, and they they deserve to feel respected and valued. So that's the approach we take when we provide services.
What do you think?
I think this has been great.
Thank you.
Listen, if thanks for hanging out with us. That's an hour.
That's how it is.
Time
That's how
goes
it
by
goes.
quick.
It does go quick.
This show.
That was an hour.
That's an hour. That's an hour. Right?
That's why I was like, yeah, it's been an hour. We didn't.
This show started at a half hour. Like the first bit of it.
But it wasn't enough. We just started talking about the weather. We talked about the weather 15 minutes.
There's a lot of filler in
We
there.
were doing a lot of filler. They was like, oops, we forgot to ask you what your job is.
Yeah.
What do you do again? So then we went
Who
to
are
that.
we talking to?
They were like, y'all never said the person's name.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
We've improved. 210 episodes later, we finally figured out what we're doing.
I mean, like, this is great. We all are doing like when you reached out, I saw your face on the thing. I was like,
That's what usually gets people in the door, Price. I sent your headshot on the email. I was like,
I said, I can't.
Price Thomas does this show. And people were like, Price Thomas?
Just because we met.
Yeah.
Before, we talked about. So it's like, I was like, it feels his face. But then, so I looked into it a little bit more and see what you guys are doing. You guys are doing really great work. And I think that's really awesome. I see some of the people that you have on, and I'm like, I don't know, I can see it on this show, but
it's so
like,
cool.
Yeah,
but here's the
so many
coolest
different
part.
types of people.
It's so cool that even people. I mean, like you. I think that you say that and you say that humbly, but like you're one of the people.
You're one of the people.
Like you're one of the people,
That's
right?
what's
I
the
mean,
point.
the guy. And I think that certainly the job that you have, and largely probably why you're very successful at, is that you don't. Think of yourself like that, but you're that guy. And I think there's a lot of responsibility with that. But it's so interesting to see how someone with a very serious mandate and like a very real job, right? There's just the other layers to it. So that was the whole point of this, of like, I can read a press release about what you do.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know who you are.
Right,
And
to
so
the
it's
word.
really interesting to get an hour just with someone to be like, I got all that. I can read the stuff. I can read the press releases. I can do that. But like, I want to know more about like what is the why that lives in there. And that's been really cool to be able to kind of draw out of people, even people who come in here, initially either sort of trepidatious or like, I read the questions and I got these answers
We've
and
been there, done that.
I'm going to tell you right now, we ain't asking those questions.
I had to start putting potential in italics and underscore. Because somebody was like, y'all didn't answer none of them questions.
But it was cool though, because I think the questions kind of. Because for me, I could go like I could start talking and I can go to all these different places. But having the questions at least made me feel a little bit like, okay, let me don't start talking.
Yeah,
about everything.
we give people a safety net.
Yeah, that's right. There is a fence.
We give people a safety net. Like, it's going to be these things.
Yeah.
Yes.
How we got to these things?
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
That's right. Thematically, we will live here.
Yeah, this is the thematic.
But it's a broad neighborhood.
Sure.
17 alleyways.
I mean, oh man, there's a sewer in there somewhere. Like, yeah, we've been all over the place.
Be careful.
I tell you what, yeah,
sink.
that's exactly right. Well, listen, that is Leon Henry, and again, if you guys have ideas for the show or want to get in touch with us, check us out on social media and all platforms at United Way Seaville, at City of Promise, envision at UnitedWaySeaville.org. The inbox is open. If folks want to either learn more about the work, get involved, on sort of the practitioner side, or just people who are listening to this and say, hey, that maybe they have something that I need or want to look into, what's the easiest and the best way to get connected?
So to get connected to me, the easiest way would just be to send me an email. Henry, my last name's Henry, first name Leon, so henryl@charlottesville.gov. If you're someone in the community that have opportunities that maybe we can partner, I'm always open to that. I just mentioned the event about the Fatherhood Engagement Week. If you have interest or you have a service that you provide that you're being intentional about engaging fathers with, please show up. Be a part of it. Cool. If you want a table or something to share your resources, just please reach out. But also, in order to contact our team members, you can go on the city's webpage. You can get information about the Department of Social Services. We also have our state website, VDSS. You can go on VDSS. There's a lot of information there about the different programs that we have. We also have, you can call our front desk. We always have someone on site as well, so you can always come into the office. Our office hours are from like 8:30 to 5. There's always someone willing to answer questions and things like that. So, I think that's the
right on. We get support from folks like you. So if you like what you hear, share this with your friends, your family, your colleagues, neighbors, strangers, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora. Rate, review it. Do we have an intern for show notes yet?
We're almost in June. We'll have some interns.
Some interns going to do show notes for us. They got 208 episodes to do.
The kids got AI, don't they?
Back catalog, yeah, that's right.
There you go. Figure
it out. Youth. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Best way to support us, to consider making a contribution, City of Promise, United Way, or any of our other incredible local nonprofits. It's how we continue doing our community work and this show. Again, this is Saturday, so there's some TomTom things happening today. Choose your adventure, engage with programs, community members, learn more about what we're doing and what they're up to. And big thanks to our sponsor, the Jefferson School Foundation. Jefferson School Foundation, reimagined, redefined, refueled for the future. That is jeffersonschoolfoundation.org. For Leon and Marky, this is Price. Enjoy the weather.
Peace.
See you next week.